Victoria Langford had built a billion-dollar company. She could negotiate mergers, manage crises, handle investors. But she had one weakness: awkward flirting. Spectacularly awkward flirting. Which was exactly how she found herself sitting across from Daniel Carter on a flight to Chicago. Daniel wasn't an executive. Wasn't an investor. Wasn't even supposed to be in first class. The airline had upgraded him after a scheduling issue. Victoria only knew that because she'd overheard him politely thanking the flight attendant. Then he'd spent the next 20 minutes helping an elderly passenger store her luggage. Without being asked. That got Victoria's attention. Kindness usually did. The two struck up a conversation. Daniel was a single father. Owned a small architectural design firm. Had a 12-year-old daughter named Emma. Victoria found herself smiling more than expected. Daniel was easy to talk to. No arrogance. No pretending. No trying to impress her. In fact, he didn't seem to recognize her at all. Which was surprisingly refreshing. Most people knew exactly who Victoria Langford was. And treated her accordingly. Daniel simply treated her like a person. 2 hours into the flight, they were discussing books. Then travel. Then parenting. The conversation flowed effortlessly. So effortlessly, in fact, that Victoria forgot herself. Which led directly to trouble. With a playful grin, she asked. "So, Daniel." "Yeah? When was your last date?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Immediately she regretted it. What kind of question was that? A strange one. A personal one. A very obvious one. Victoria felt heat rise into her face. Daniel looked surprised. Then thoughtful. For a moment he pretended to calculate. Finally he looked up. Directly at her. And smiled. "Right now." Victoria blinked. "What?" Daniel shrugged. "I'm sitting across from a smart, funny woman." A pause. "We're talking for hours." Another pause. "We're sharing terrible airline coffee." Victoria couldn't stop smiling. Daniel leaned back. "Sounds like a date to me." For the first time in years, Victoria Langford was completely speechless. The businessman across the aisle watched the exchange and quietly grinned. The flight attendant nearly laughed. And Daniel seemed entirely unaware of the effect he'd had. Victoria finally found her voice. "That's a very dangerous answer." Daniel laughed. Was it the wrong answer? She opened her mouth. Then closed it. Because she honestly wasn't sure. By the time the plane landed, they had exchanged numbers. Something Victoria almost never did. Something Daniel rarely did either. Yet somehow it felt natural. As they walked through the terminal, Victoria expected the conversation to end. Instead, Daniel's phone rang. His daughter's name appeared on the screen. "Excuse me." Victoria nodded. Daniel immediately answered. "Hey, Em." His face softened instantly. Victoria watched as he listened. Smiled. Encouraged. For 10 full minutes, his entire attention belonged to his daughter. Not work. Not travel. Not anything else. Just Emma. When the call ended, Victoria couldn't help noticing something. The way he talked about his daughter. The pride. The patience. The warmth. It told her more about Daniel than any resume ever could. Over the next several weeks, they kept talking. Texts became calls. Calls became dinners. Dinners became something neither wanted to define too quickly. For the first time in a long time, both were genuinely happy. Then one evening, everything changed. Victoria invited Daniel to a charity gala. A routine event. At least, that's what she thought. The ballroom was filled with executives, investors, and media personalities. The moment Victoria entered, cameras turned. People gathered. Questions flew. Daniel suddenly realized something. A very important something. The woman he'd been dating wasn't merely successful. She was one of the most recognizable CEOs in the country. Victoria noticed the realization immediately. You didn't know? Daniel laughed. I knew you were successful. A pause. I didn't know there were photographers. Victoria covered her face, laughing. But later that evening, something happened that neither of them expected. A prominent investor approached their table. He glanced at Daniel, then smiled condescendingly. And what exactly do you do? The tone wasn't curious. It was dismissive. Daniel recognized it immediately. So did Victoria. Before she could respond, Daniel calmly answered. The investor's smile vanished. Then came a second question. And a third. Within minutes, the investor looked increasingly uncomfortable. Because Daniel knew something. Something valuable. Something that could affect a deal worth hundreds of millions. Victoria stared. The investor stared. The entire table stared. Then Victoria realized there was far more to Daniel's past than he'd ever mentioned. Far more. And what she discovered next would completely change the way she saw the man she'd met on an airplane. The ballroom had grown unusually quiet. The investor who had approached their table no longer looked confident. He looked concerned. Very concerned. Across the table, Daniel remained calm. Victoria watched the exchange carefully. Because something strange was happening. The investor had begun the conversation assuming Daniel was unimportant. Now he was asking questions. Serious questions. Questions people only asked when they believed the answers mattered. Finally Victoria leaned forward. Okay. The investor looked at her. She pointed at Daniel. What am I missing? Daniel immediately shook his head. Nothing. The investor laughed. That's not true. Daniel sighed. Which only made Victoria more curious. The investor turned toward her. Do you know who he is? Victoria smiled. I know he's Daniel. The investor shook his head. No. A pause. I mean before that. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. As though he'd seen this moment coming. Then the investor continued. 10 years ago, this man helped build one of the most successful infrastructure consulting firms in the country. Victoria blinked. What? The investor nodded.